So this is a video that I feel like I've been a little bit more nervous about, but that I feel like is one of the most important of all of the ones that we're doing for you guys. We want to tell you all why we decided to make a documentary on the sex trade. The very few times I've even posted about like the work that we're doing, people have raised so many questions like, why are you in a brothel? Why are you talking to a prostitute? And we really just want, before you watch the series, which comes out on the 13th, so I hope you guys tune in. Not, I hope, like, you guys better all tune in, because we did this for you. Just kidding. But the reason, we really want to be completely honest and tell you guys the truth on why we decided to do this series. And I think the best way to start out, we were just talking about what we're gonna talk about, is to take it back to day one, where we had a discussion and we came up with like some sort of thesis on what this was going to be about. So Kate has that.
Yeah, just for context too, you guys know Nora was always really into the issue of sex trafficking. Like that was the first thing your line with Listen Up was like going toward a trafficking organization.
Yes.
I like really didn't know anything about it going into it. So that was also like really interesting, I feel like. So this was all Nora's idea, like this is happening domestically, let's do a series on like how and why is this happening in our society? Yeah,
and I thought, like, I went into this thinking that I knew the answers to this and I thought it was gonna be a piece of cake. Like, I cannot believe that from when we started this, like, our deadline was gonna be fall.
Yeah, we thought, I can't believe we thought we would get that done.
Like, we thought that, like, a few months or whatever, we'll, like, knock this out, and we realized that we had, like, taken on, like, a monster of a topic.
Yeah.
That we would not have done it justice had we taken, like, less time.
So this is our original one sheet. So one sheets are like a marketing tool that you make to basically explain what you're working on. Yeah. So one of the sentences in here was that this series shows viewers how this form of modern day slavery unfolds on American highways, in its cities, and around some of its most famous events. Which all of that was based on just like stereotypes.
Yeah.
We really didn't understand this issue at all. And I think it's interesting, like every time we tell people what we're working on, there are a few things they say.
It's those things.
Yeah, they're like, oh, that happens around, like.
That happens in my backyard.
Right, because of my highway that goes through my city, which I thought that, I was like, St. Louis is really bad for this, because we have so many highways, but like, it's not about people moving around. Like, this is happening everywhere, no matter if you have a highway there or not.
Yeah.
Or like having.
And then even the events thing, like you guys have, I'm sure, heard about like the Super Bowl or the Olympics and the trafficking that happens. But the reality of it is it happens where the demand goes, and people who are attending this are a part of the demand, and that's why it's happening. Like, it's nothing special, it's just that there's a concentration of men who want to buy sex when those events come to town.
But like, it will happen in the city even if that's not happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, we went into it really narrowly, like we're gonna cover sex trafficking.
And I think that we also kind of, I mean, me personally, I think I went into this with like kind of the wrong mentality of like, I'm gonna go into this and tell people and show people like that the solution is getting all women in education and helping with like, I don't know, telling these survivor stories and like being kind of this like hero and stuff as a journalist, and quickly realized that one, that's not our job, and two, that's not our position. Like, that's not even fair for us to even start out that way. And we quickly learned that the heroes in the situation are the survivors, but also the thrivers, like people who were victims of exploitation or this trade, like the sex trade in general, and have kind of pushed through and became their own advocates and like their own voices, and we have the privilege of giving them the platform to elevate that voice, and that's what our job really came down to.
We did a lot of reporting where we were talking to survivors of sex trafficking, and we were really focused on organizations that use that term, sex trafficking, and that issue. And then we kind of always had this question in our minds, like, okay, this is related to prostitution though, and like this is related to other examples of sex work.
And the spectrum, like whenever we would talk to survivors, we realized survivors do not all have the same experience, and some people had experiences where like they weren't lured in by like somebody, like they wanted to get into sex work and then found out they were being exploited, or like it was just, the spectrum thing was so mind-boggling because we were like, I thought that this was all the same thing and there was the same solution and the same issues, and that wasn't the case at all.
Yeah, or like we talked to two people, one of them, they had like pretty much the same
exact same story.
Yeah, they had a pimp who was controlling all of their money. And one of them saw that instance as sex trafficking, and the other one didn't, and like continues to work in the sex trade.
Continues to work in the sex trade, but it was also abused by the pimp, and the one that considers herself trafficked wasn't physically abused by that person.
Yeah, and so hearing those two stories, I feel like that was kind of the moment where we were like, oh my gosh, this is really complicated. It's all about kind of consent and
how people identify their experiences.
And you have to respect what people are telling you. Like if they don't feel like they were being trafficked, then you can't tell them, hey, you're a victim. You know?
Absolutely.
We went into this really narrowly wanting to focus on sex trafficking, and then we started hearing about all this other violence and harm that was happening. So it wasn't that we were trying to cover like, oh, but there is a positive part of this. It was like, no, people that like say that they weren't being trafficked, they would call themselves sex workers, but they're also experiencing this violence and this exploitation, and like
that there's still harm being done throughout the sex trade no matter where on the spectrum you are.
Yeah, and it was just kind of the realization that we were just in a tiny little tunnel, and we needed to be a lot more open about what the issues were.
And again, like this was a process that we went through, that we're still going through, and we learned along the way, and you guys will be able to see that through the vlogs that we took, like wherever we were shooting, and also like in the series itself. Just to like clarify the reason that we are covering the sex trade also, I think we're both very passionate about sexual violence and combating sexual violence, and are very vocal about it, but also to highlight the fact that the injustices and the harm that's happening in the sex trade are not about sex. Like we are covering something that's talking about sex and money, and it's really important to understand that this is a problem consisting of like power and socioeconomic injustice, racial injustice, gender inequality, and that's really what the essence of this series is. And we want to make sure that like after you watch this, you have kind of similar questions in your mind about the sex trade and about our society and how we treat like women and women of color and trans women, and what we're doing wrong. So yeah, I think that in order to cover all of these injustices, we took on one aspect of like the overall issue, and that for us was like covering the sex trade, and not just covering it, but like exposing the reality of the sex trade in the US.
Yeah, and I think what's really different about our series is that we're not talking to, like we do talk to people who are making policy and kind of higher up people like that, but we're really focused on the like everyday lived experience for the people that are in each of these roles. So like the first episode that you're going to watch is all about the exploitation and trafficking that's happening. The second one is about people who call themselves sex workers and kind of are in a different place along that consent line. And then the third episode is all about the demand side and the buyers.
Yep.
And in each of those, we talk to people who define themselves as whatever each of those roles is.
And respectively, like we let, like we said, we give them that platform, we let them identify as that because of their experience, and we try to learn from their experience.
So another problem going into this is that I think that there's a lot of problems with the way media typically covers this anyway, which is why we didn't know. So we were learning bad habits from people that
we were watching and that we looked up to.
Yeah, so either you'll see like the kind of really moralistic view where it's like very, very anti-sex trade with no understanding of like why people might end up in this situation. So it's
with no acknowledgement of the fact that this is a social safety net for people too.
Right, that it's more of like a judgmental approach, yeah. And it's kind of like also I think saying, hey, like women can't make their own decision about what they're experiencing.
Yeah,
because like we talked about the two people who had the same exact experiences, like I'm not going to tell one of them that they were being trafficked. Like,
Yeah.
you have to respect what they say was happening to them.
Yep.
But then the other way that it's covered by, like, especially our digital competitors, I think, is in a very objectifying way, where it's like they're talking to sex workers about the really sexual parts of it. So
Yeah.
they're talking to them about, like, what people's, like,
fetishes are,
and it's more like a sexualized kind of male
it's like
gaze.
glamorizing. It's like
Yeah.
glamorizing the sex trade without, which there's no problem like talking about things in the sex trade and like the actual work, but I think it's also important to acknowledge like the harm being done and the treatment of women and the mentality of like people coming through and like where the money's coming from. All of those things that like people don't want to talk about because they're too afraid to, or they think that it like muddies the story and makes it less pretty and polished.
It's interesting because we ended up falling in a very like middle ground with that.
Yeah.
Like, we do talk to sex workers, and some of them are like, we want this to be treated like any other job.
Yeah.
But then we also talk to the people who think that there's no such thing as consensual like sex trade. If there's money involved, there's no consent. And
yeah.
I also think it's interesting that we have both of those voices represented, but like, we really don't have an opinion. Like, it's very,
Yeah.
it's interesting going into something. We were hoping that we would be able to make like policy recommendations or really say, we know this is the fix, and I'm not there.
Yeah, but and I don't, and we also realize like as journalists, like our role in journalists, like we don't need to be there. Like, that's not what our job was, to bring you guys the information, bring you the truth, bring you the story, and that's really what we're focusing on doing. But I think that something that we realize that makes us really lucky that we have the privilege to cover this issue is that this documentary series itself, I think, will be enough for some people who are not familiar with this issue at all to go out and care about it. And because a lot of the policy that's made regarding whether it's trafficking or sex work or anything along like in the sex trade, a lot of that policy is local. And so if you really care about the stories that you're about to watch and the voices that you're about to hear and feel a certain way about it, you can call up your local representatives and push for some type of policy change. Like, you have the ability, you have the power in your hands to have your voice be heard and to connect with others in your community who need their voices heard. And essentially, because of this, you can go and make a difference. And that's really what we're hoping you're able to do.
Yeah, we hope that you're inspired by hearing these conversations you wouldn't normally hear to do something about it.
We were definitely very inspired.
Yeah, and I also think that last year we saw a really big conversation around sexual violence and sexual harassment, but people kind of have a blind spot when it comes to the sex trade and the harms that are happening in it. And I do think that there's a lot of gender-based violence that's happening in the sex trade. So hopefully it can also spark some conversations about consent and violence within this specific sex and money.
I absolutely agree. Just to acknowledge also like one elephant that's going to be in the room. I know that a lot of you guys who are following me have had questions about like, why is a Muslim woman in hijab covering this or in these spaces? And I think that we've had several conversations of why actually, one, this is an issue that I'm super passionate about, and I know that you guys know that, but a lot of people like just don't get it. And two, like the other stories that I've covered in the past, this is one of those things where it was so hard to build trust with the people that we were talking to, and being able to come at it with like the approach that I know what it's like to be misrepresented in the media, and I don't want to do that to you, and I really want to take care of like the truth that you're telling me and make sure that it serves as some sort of justice for you. Was able to give us like the access that we needed for a lot of these stories. And there were so many times where like Kate and Kevin also were able to see like that me kind of just being myself was like a way we were able to get access and stories and like just connection with certain people that I feel like we otherwise wouldn't have had. So obviously the hijab has nothing to do with the actual stories, but just kind of like I said, being myself going into this, I feel like we were able to like just build a different level of trust that the media often doesn't get a chance to do.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's journalism. Like, if you want to be a professional journalist, like, you have to cover all kinds of stories. And so I feel like it's really productive and good.
And I'm really proud of
people telling
like,
the
the
stories
work that we are doing. And finally, before we sign off, the series will be available on Newsy's website. It will also be available on Hulu
and on YouTube
and all the socials. So, and I'll make sure to like go back to all of these videos and link wherever you can watch it below. But stay tuned because this is about to come out and you don't want to miss it.
I'm working on this for a long time.
So yeah, love it, share it, talk about it, and let us know.
Yeah, pumped to hear from you.
Bye.
Hey friends, thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, comment, and of course, subscribe. And don't forget to hit me up on Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. See you guys on the next one.